Angela Merkel said that the government had acted out of, quote, right-wing extremist racist motives. It was the third deadly attack attributed to right-wing suspects in the country in 1 year. And now this. I mean, what is going on? What actually happened? I thought we should find out. Joining me now is Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler, who's Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project and head of the Berlin office. Hans, danke für heute. As we would say, you know, what is going? I mean, I lived in Germany for some time. What is going on? I mean, the far right has always been bubbling under, but this has been a huge operation with these, albeit it was only 22. But I note that one of the people involved was 71-year-old Heinrich Prince Reuss. One of the prince is a descendant of the House of Reuss. So, I mean, there are some pretty high-profile individuals. So tell us about this group, this Reichsbürger, what it is and what they hope to do with so few people.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Trisha. First of all, there is no other way to say this. This was a serious attempt at a coup d'etat in Germany. The 25 people that were arrested is not the end of the story. There are additional people that are under investigation, and the number keeps growing. They all belonged at the core of it to a movement that it's called the Reichsbürger, which holds old neo-Nazi beliefs really prevalent since 1945 in Germany, that the Deutsche Reich did not end with the end of the Second World War and the foundation of the Federal Republic, but continues, and therefore all political institutions on the local, state and federal level are therefore inherently illegal. That Reichsbürger movement as a movement became identifiable as a separate strand of right-wing extremism in the 1980s. And for the first 2 decades, they were really doing stupid things, but essentially harmless things. So they printed their own passports and driver's licenses and refused to pay taxes, harassed local authorities with letters. But in the last 10 years, they really do have radicalized. So the first instance was a raid on a home of a Reichsbürger who refused to pay taxes, which is not legal in Germany. And it was answered by a really shootout that cost one Bavarian policeman's life. And since that time, more and more of these instances have occurred. And this is the worst of all now. Now, Heinrich XIII, Prince Reuss, is really not a major aristocrat. Even if he would be, this is a republic for quite a while. And, aristocrats don't really hold special positions in the way that they may still have in the UK.
But just talking about this, obviously they were, as you said, they never really went away. They bubbled underground. And I suspect that the internet has allowed them to spread their ideology even more so. What is their ideology? When you say, is it like Nazism, or have they amended it?
Well, I mean, this particular group is a really interesting amalgamation of various different strands. So at the core is this Reichsbürger belief that everything is illegal here in Germany. It's a company, it's not a state. But then added to it are elements from QAnon, because in their warped minds, there was a deep state in Germany and some murky alliance of intelligence services was about to move against this deep state in their operations, which, by the way, included a fairly likely successful planned armed assault and infiltration of the federal parliament in Germany, in Berlin. Would then support this alliance's activities to destroy the deep state. So that's the QAnon bit. But then there's also a COVID denier element to it, because ironically, this cell was not discovered by itself. It was discovered as a sideline of another investigations into the Reichsbürger, a cell that was planning to kidnap and kill the Federal Minister of Health, Karl Lauterbach, after a talk show. And in the course of that investigations, they came across that cell. Right. So, and it keeps growing. Just today, one of the policemen of the state police force in Germany had been suspended for his involvement in that wider network of that group. So we're not at the end, we're at the very beginning of the investigation. Because, I mean, to think these people are delusional is correct, but these are also highly effective people. One of them, former member of the federal parliament of the right-wing extremist party, AfD, Alternative for Germany, right? They were 100% sure that 52 people are not going to bring down the Federal Republic of Germany, so that the network must be bigger.
So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Do you think you talked about QAnon and what have you, do you think that the January 6th, the uprising and Donald Trump, it seems around the world it emboldened or gave credence to a lot of these organizations? Would you agree with that? Do you think there's been a rise? I know in the UK they've looked at the rise of the right wing and groups like incels and what have you, and there definitely is a threat there. But do you think when you get things like uprisings in the US and the storming of the Capitol and what have you, that it emboldens groups like this Reichsbürger group in Germany?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of elements here. So very bizarrely, the German and QAnon story is a very peculiar one because Germany is the major non-English speaking country where QAnon caught on more than anywhere else, comparable maybe to Britain. So there is this weird, bizarre combination why Germans feel this particular conspiracy theory to be particularly appealing. Yes, January 6th certainly did, inspire a lot of people. But I have to mention that before January 6th, there was August 2020, where something very similar happened in front of the Reichstag in Germany at the tail end of a COVID denier demonstration in Berlin, where again, right-wing extremist elements tried to storm the federal parliament in Germany and were stopped by police, luckily. So, people learn from each other, ideas transmit. And of course, the right-wing extremists, both here in Germany, but I think also in the UK and in the US, were singularly successful to use the COVID pandemic to expand their reach into strata of society they wouldn't have reached before, building on the fears and insecurities that people had, and also to deepen their own radicalization. And once that episode was over, we seamlessly transitioned, because of this absolutely ludicrous invasion of Russia to Ukraine, into a cost of living and energy crisis, which again creates fear and uncertainty, and nothing is better for fascists than war, uncertainty, and economic crisis. That's the air they breathe.
Yeah, and instability. Is there an element of anti-Semitism or anti-immigration as well? Is that bolted on? Because we've seen the right wing in France. That's where, as you say, they'll latch on to anything that where there is, controversy, where there is big discussion, a loud noise. They will latch on to that. Is it the same with this group?
Look, I mean, wherever there is QAnon, because if you really ask the simple question, who is leading the deep state, right? You come across then names being mentioned that happen to be all Jewish. So it's simply anti-Semitism couched in, slightly more malleable terms that people could maybe accept because they don't get what the point is. Yes, this is simply anti-Semitism in a new version. So yes, there were elements of anti-Semitism, especially there's also elements of real hatred and xenophobia within the AfD, of which one of the leading members of the group was a former member of federal parliament, i.e. part of the elite. They only have 78 seats, right? So not many people of the AfD get to be federal parliament members, right? So yeah, that is one of the underlying currents, although this was not the major issue that was their motivation at this particular point.
How do the police, or how do counterterrorism, how do they track them? Is it about monitoring online? Again, in the UK, a lot of it is, and the police are kind of struggling to catch up with the new methods that these groups have for disseminating information. I mean, where is that part that you can prize up and find out who these people are? Because you've talked about almost accidental because of the COVID denying and then coming across one thing that led to another. But is there a monitoring of social activity online and groups within, all of these different sites that are having these conversations and recruiting new people?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of points here that are important. So first of all, Germany has a particular legal construction that allows for the security services to publicly declare a certain movement or group extremist. That doesn't mean it is banned, but it does give the intelligence services greater leeway. They can bug the apartments, they can do observations, they can break into their email. Plus, of course, there is online monitoring, and the prosecutor said most of the planning for this particular group was done online. There were face-to-face meetings where they tried to recruit soldiers and policemen, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But the major part of the planning bit was done online. The third aspect here is that, again, it is demonstrating the abject failure of global companies making billions of dollars running social media and messenger services in adequately monitoring their content on their website. One more time, we have an example, this time where a coup d'etat was planned online and the platforms did nothing. Obviously, the platforms know the content, otherwise they couldn't curate the content, right? So the algorithms that promote or demote what you're saying and who's seeing it, that recognizes content. So they knew the content and did nothing to stop this planning from going on or even inform the authorities. As far as we understand, this was not done on a hint by a platform that this is going on. This was part of a hardcore police investigation.
Well, so, I mean, it sounds, you can't barely believe it, can you? I mean, this isn't something that was hidden away. I thought you were going to say it was some deep black web or something like that. This wasn't that hidden away that these... I mean, it's incredible that people can still have these conversations and nothing is done, nothing is flagged up. Wow.
Well, I mean, look, where is the risk? Which person ever got arrested because Facebook, Telegram, or Instagram, or YouTube ever flagged them to the authorities? These platforms say the authorities have to tell us when there is something illegal going on, and then we do maybe take care of it, not the other way around. So yeah, they're absolutely not part of the defensive system, and they fail society over and over again. This is just a very serious example. Now, let me be clear. There was absolutely no chance that this coup d'etat would have worked. Right, so Germany is not a failed state, and 3,000 policemen in 11 federal states, plus one in arrest in Italy, plus one in Austria, shows that the system and the institutions continue to work quite well when it comes to the prevention of these kind of serious dangers. But if these had not been stopped, there would have been several, if not many, people dead, because there was violence in the federal parliament plant, access provided by the former member of parliament who still had her access pass, which means she could get in without being searched. So one person with one weapon at least would have been able to enter the parliament. Then there were scoping of electricity power stations, local authorities, as well as German military camps. All of this would have definitely meted out a lot of violence. So while this was not a threat to the Federal Republic as a country or as a political system, it was a real serious terrorism threat.
And what happens to these people? I mean, if they get, obviously they've been arrested when they go to prison, because again, from the UK's point of view, from many countries' point of view, the risk is when they go into prison that they then indoctrinate a lot of dispossessed, angry people and actually start recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they'll have to see what the court cases then result in. I would think there are going to be quite serious sentences for at least the ringleaders, including that former member of parliament, who, by the way, worked as a judge in Berlin the day of her arrest. Which kind of exposes a little bit more of the pitfalls of the German system, how hard it is to actually remove civil servants. She's now suspended, funnily enough, because she's in prison. There is really, if you look at the European experience with extremists in prison, there are various different models that have been tried, and it's really hard to say what works, separating them out, mixing with the other prison population. But what is very clear is that you have to have off-ramps and people taking care of these individuals while they are all still in prison, trying to de-radicalize them, trying to wean them off this kind of absurd, delusionally thinking. I mean, just imagine you, in your mind, for real, this country, which is very successful economically for the last 70 years, a major player on the world stage, all of this is some kind of illegal, occupied country in which a deep state wields power while there are elections every couple of years, right, with very different results. So showing that the system does react to trends in the population. I mean, to get off that will take some time, but I hope it's not impossible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Danke vielmal. Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director of Counter-Extremism Project there on the thwarted coup.